It was around September when I was looking for a temporary job, and I'd applied everywhere I could think of. From grocery stores to arcades, I will admit that I may have purposefully focused on applying to places I felt would be either a breeze to work in or fun. It was getting dark, so on my last job-finding trip, I decided to go home and figure it out next weekend. I cut through an abandoned mall to save time, when I came across a Halloween store in the centre. During the scary season, it's common for various Halloween stores to open up in abandoned areas, but in the middle of an empty dead mall was just unusual. The store also didn't look anything like the other ones. Probably another company trying to get into the competition, I thought. I looked up at the deteriorating orange neon sign that read, "The Halloween Hut, 'tis the season to dress your worst." So I walked in and was greeted by an employee sitting by the counter. I asked him if by chance they were hiring, to which he said yes. Then flash forward to 2 weekends later, when I was sitting at the same counter scrolling through my phone, when a mom and her 2 kids entered the store. The mother asked where the children's costumes were, so I pointed her to the far left corner. They hurried along as I waited for them to come back, and after a few minutes I remembered that I didn't tell them to not try on the costumes. For some reason, that was the only rule my boss really enforced. I got out of my chair and headed towards them to let them know, and to my horror I saw the mother lying dead on the floor as a small werewolf was feasting on her corpse. It stopped and turned to face me, growling. Then it lunged at me, so I made a break for it. I was nearly out of the door until a witch flicked her wand and tossed me back towards the werewolf. As the werewolf quickly sank its teeth into my right shoulder, I let out a blood-curdling scream and shoved it aside with all my might, pushing the witch into a rack of costumes. Then I rushed out the front doors and didn't stop running until I got home. I called the cops, but they found no store in that mall, nor traces that there ever was one. My family insisted that I was just bitten by a rabid dog, and the shock made me think that's what happened too. But I know what happened was real, and not because of the bite mark on my shoulder, and also because whilst walking down my usual block today, I saw another Halloween hut store appear next to the old movie theatre. A dad and a young daughter walked out, the daughter holding a spider costume in her hand. I hope the dad isn't afraid of giant spiders. My family has always been big on Halloween, with our house fully decorated inside and out. And when we were kids, we would walk the streets trick-or-treating. Then as adults, it would be costume parties. I've got lots of good memories of Halloween nights with my 2 older brothers, mother and friends. But there's one particular night that we still frequently talk about via a family group chat. It wasn't as pleasant as others and was basically downright chilling. It's forever embedded itself in our collective reflections. October 31st, 1991. I had turned 2 in June and was already in my own bedroom, which had been a designated nursery beforehand. We lived in a suburb of Houston, Texas, that is today a curved row of houses, but back then was a densely forested area. There was a large window in my bedroom that looked across the backyard and into the woods beyond. The moon was in a waning crescent shape and projected just enough light to be able to see, and I had a big plastic cutout jack-o'-lantern hanging by a thumbtack on my wall. Thin traces of splintered moonlight draped onto its big grinning face, an eerie setting indeed for what is still my favourite night of the year. My mum, brothers and I were all worn out after a lengthy candy excursion that went well past our usual bedtime. So my 2 siblings were in their own rooms, and my parents were watching Night of the Living Dead in the living room. I laid beneath the covers, taking in the sound of the swirling ceiling fan overhead, my drifting eyes looking towards my window. That's when I heard it. a faint scratching, like the pawing of a kitten on a glass door. Only we didn't have a kitten, and there certainly wasn't a glass door in my room. I stirred fully awake, wondering what the sound was, listening carefully to the gentleness of the silence, the swirling of the ceiling fan, Barbara's scream from the living room television, a symphony of horns bursting to life as she was chased to her car by a horde of the undead. Then it came again, a scratching sound, like fingernails at the base of my window now. I looked towards the window and there was nothing there, just slithers of Halloween moonlight passing through treetops and rushing into my bedroom. Then it happened again, from something wholly unseen. A ghost? A murderer? Was it this thing my brothers had told me about called the boogeyman? Or some other creature from the deep recesses of the forest, trying to break in, trying to eat me, murder me, or zap me to planets unknown? The scratching continued, the invisible fingers of something that could only be lurking on the other side of my window. Finally, I couldn't restrain myself any longer and screamed like a 2-year-old had never screamed before. My mum came charging into my room, bursting the door open like a firefighter, and I cried out to her that there was something at my window trying to get in. She heard the scratching sound too, and alarmed, she turned on the light and raced to the window, but there was nothing. No ghost, no murderer, no boogeyman, not even a lizard or moth, not even a tree limb. But still, it scratched and scratched. My mum called for my dad, and by this time my brothers were rushing into my room too with pop guns in their hands. My dad stepped inside, hearing the scratching sound as well. Then he went to the window beside my mum, but also saw nothing outside. Yet the scratching came again. Finally, we saw what it was. Scraping the wall just above my head was the plastic cutout of the grinning jack-o'-lantern. It moved in the wind of my ceiling fan, the thumbtack having loosened its grip somehow. My dad took it down and the scratching suddenly ceased. But what a fright it was on that Halloween night. My brothers still enjoy poking fun at me about it, although none of us are below the age of 30 anymore. Around 2018-19, I, a 25-year-old female at the time, was living in Nebraska where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in the state, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. But all of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, etc. Plus his parents were super cool, and we could drink out there as long as we stayed in the house. It was tons of fun. Now I was, and am, quite scared of the dark, so I wouldn't go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting, and the nearest neighbour was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to and from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen. Until one night. The drive out there was a long, winding, 2-way road that had thick trees on either sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. There was barely any lighting, of course, besides a street lamp every once in a while, and there was very little traffic, so it was all inherently a bit creepy. And I'll admit to having sped through this section of road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on, as right in front of me in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, Picture a completely pitch-black road with the thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. It was a family of 3 or 4, a tall, slim woman, an average height-weight man, a child with short hair, but I couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing, and I couldn't see their face, but they were maybe around 8 years old, and their mother was pushing a stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered, but not nice either, and they also were not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they had been walking in the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the road in the same direction I was heading. I had turned my music down to hear if they were speaking or had any music playing, etc., but they didn't. The hairs on my arms immediately stood up, and I came to a stop in the road behind them and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me being there and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process what I was seeing and register how truly strange it was, they all at the same time stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me, and that I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I just immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself off the road, then booking it in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty, and this is the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road, and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of 3 reactions. They immediately think I'm cuckoo, I'm lying, or they've had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me, to be honest. It was and still is the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the crap out of me, a distraction for an attempted robbery, assault, etc., or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option. So I'm into LARP, and for those who don't know what it is, we basically spend the weekend in the woods dressed as medieval fantasy characters and interact with each other. I go to these events with my friend and partner, and we meet some more friends when we're there. There are all types of people at these events, but 99.9% of them are absolute angels. I had yet to meet the 1%, but I wish I hadn't. Before the event started, a guy, we'll call him Greg, swung by my tent whilst I was setting it up. My partner and friend were setting up the secondary tent up a path and couldn't see me, and there were 5 other people to my right. I had never met the guy before, but as soon as he said hi, I had a bad feeling. He was around 5'10", obese, had a neck beard, basically what would fit the description of an incel. He approached me and asked if I was there alone, to which I replied no, but I didn't mention my partner or friend directly. He then asked if I was a gamer, to which I said yes. Then from there he started rambling on about Ark Survival, which is a game I personally have 3,000 plus hours on. He was telling me blatant wrong info, misnaming the dinos, and telling me stuff that is impossible to do in the game, even with mods, etc. But every time I corrected him, I could see he was visibly getting more annoyed. I ended the conversation, saying I had to go back to setting up the tent, and he left. Then fast forward to around 10-11 p.m, when the event had begun. which meant any mention of the real world, such as cars, TV, pop culture, etc., was forbidden by rule called decorum. So we were playing a campfire game with my friends and my partner when the guy from earlier came by. He sat down next to me, so I moved over a bit to make room, but then he scooted closer. I moved again, and again he scooted. Eventually I got up and sat next to my friend as we played the game. He kept referring to the real world, video games specifically, so we told him either to leave or to make an effort and speak properly, so he left. The next day I went up a trail for fake hunting, gathering resources, and as I came back down towards the village, in the middle of the woods with no camps I could hide in, he was there waiting for me on the trail. He asked me if I would like to go get a coffee or something sometime, to which I answered, no thanks. As we walked down the trail, I told him I had to collect plants for my potion, so if he could excuse me, I'd be going back to the village to leave my bow and collect my basket. I walked off fast and he followed me, grabbed my arm and said to me, "I could come with you. You, me, alone in the woods looking for plants. That sounds like the perfect scenario to me." I freaked out and walked very fast down the trail to the village. My neighbours noticed me and looked very concerned, so asked if I needed help. I said to them, in an honesty, which is a code to say, take me seriously, this isn't part of the game, and that this dude is being extra creepy and following me. So they took their weapons, foam weapons, and told him to fuck off before they carved him a new asshole. Then I stayed with them for a few minutes before chilling with my friends. Night came, and we were having fun. Stuff was going on in terms of fighting and encounters. Then at around midnight, I decided to go to the bathroom. At that point, I hadn't seen the guy since around 7 p.m, but as I was coming back from the bathroom in complete darkness, this guy jumped from a bush and pinned me against a tree. He told me he was not proud of me for leading him on, and that he didn't understand why I would hold another guy's hand and hug 3 other guys but not him. I told him I was holding my fiancé's hand, and I always hug my friends, but he was neither. I also told him to stop his bullshit, saying the words, "in all honesty," again, to which he answered, "But what if in all honesty I just wanted a little kiss, huh? Just a little kiss and then you can go." I yelled no and tried to hit him to get away. My friends who were right on the other side of the bridge separating us heard me scream, so they grabbed their weapons, called upon my neighbours, and around 10 people came careening down the bridge to help me. The guy let me go and turned to my rescuers, saying he was just interrogating me for information concerning the demons, our foes, and my friends, who have seen this guy be an asshole already, told him not to move and that they were going to get the owner of the LARP to deal with him. He tried to dissuade them, but my neighbours told him to sit down or he'd be visiting Death's altar before he could move. I was taken away by my fiancé, who was very worried and concerned about what had happened. Then the owner came, and I explained what had happened to them. He took Greg outside the play to discuss, and from what I heard, he was kindly asked not to come back for any future events. It happened on a 5th grade field trip in the early 2000s. We were going to an auditorium at a local nature centre with the 5th graders of the other elementary school in our district. It was early autumn, and with the exception of an end-of-the-year bowling party, this was our class's last elementary school trip. I was really tired that day. The whole morning I suffered from brain fog. I remember entering a kind of detached euphoria during the bus ride, a kind of indifferent relaxation brought on by intermediate fatigue. The 5th graders from the 2 schools packed the auditorium of about 200 seats. It was drab and windowless, and annoyingly, the air conditioner was on just high enough to keep me from being able to nap while we waited for the presentation. Curiously, the presentation was not by park or conservation employees, but as best as I can remember, it was delivered by one or more people from some non-profit type organisation. The topic was guided imagery meditation. First, the presenters gave an overview of the practice and its utility, which basically involved picturing yourself in a specific environment and imagining interaction. The goal is to reduce stress and overcome negative emotions, or traumatic memories if that applied to you. Nature settings are commonly used, hence why we were at a nature centre for this. After the introduction, we were taken outside to practice and were told to close our eyes, breathe slowly, and try to listen intently to the natural outdoor sounds. The next step was to imagine ourselves in a warm wilderness setting, the speaker guiding us through different locations, eventually leading us to a cave where there was a talking statue. We were told to decide whether to take the statue with us, then continue the meditation on our own. After this, we were shuffled back into the auditorium, and I remember feeling a little weirded out. The reason why it felt we needed this field trip was never made apparent, but looking back, I guess it may have been due to recent events such as the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's my best guess, but it still doesn't explain what happened later. Once we were settled down, we were shown a guided imagery video. In the background was relaxing woodwind music that we would broadly call ASMR today. A soothing male and female voice alternated narrative lines as fast-moving nature scenes played. Then at various points, the voices told us to close our eyes, breathe a certain way, or think certain thoughts. I was still feeling pretty tired and off-kilter, and was starting to get lightheaded. I needed to use the bathroom. Our teacher was in the middle of an eyes shut episode with everyone else, so being sat by the exit, I just got up and went without asking. I was in the restroom for probably 5 to 10 minutes, and felt a lot better as I finished up. Then I spent a couple of minutes looking at nature paintings in the hallway, before ducking back into the auditorium. I immediately became disoriented when I emerged from the antechamber to the gallery, and the projector screen was now flashing. The background music had been replaced with what I think was an ascending shepherd tone, mixed with static, and beneath that I could hear what sounded like a human voice, slowed to unintelligibility. On the screen there was a sort of swirling vortex pattern, in which rapidly changing video scenes flashed, most going by too fast to make them out clearly. But they were unsettling. Several seemed to show pulsating and bleeding flesh. One showed a skull being cut open and the brain sliced down the middle. After a few moments, I looked around and saw that everyone else was just staring blithely at the screen, except one. I caught the gaze of a kid from the other school, seated about 10 rows away towards the opposite wall. I don't know if the phrase, "what the fuck," was in either of our lexicons, but it was certainly the substance of our shared thought. We continued looking at the screen, at our peers, then back at each other several times before a loud warbling tone screeched from the speakers for several seconds. With a soft static boom, the normal audio and video resumed as everyone else blinked rapidly and continued watching like nothing had happened. The video went on for maybe 20 more minutes, and the other kid and I continued to make sporadic eye contact for the remainder of it, as well as when the teachers led us all out of the auditorium into the parking lot, until we disappeared into our respective buses. My physical and mental torpor was thoroughly cured by then, and on the ride home, there was lots of chatter about how enlightening and transformative the presentation and video had been. It had clearly been a positive experience for everyone else. To this day, I have frequent nightmares relating to that brief suspension of reality in that video gallery. Sometimes it just involves recreations of the sounds and images from the video, and sometimes it's a reliving of the field trip itself. Sometimes that other kid is there, and we look at each other silently trying to make sense of the situation. Often the dreams are semi-lucid, and it feels like my brain is trying to process subliminal information from the film, or someone is prying around inside my mind. Medication doesn't help. Therapy so far has helped very little. Recently, I decided to give guided imagery meditation a shot. It helps me relieve waking stress, but the nightmares persist. Moreover, when I try to apply the technique directly to that field trip experience, intrusive thoughts related to that part of the video that I had walked in on take over. I wonder if it would be better or worse if I hadn't taken the bathroom break. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the stories in this episode. Please let me know what your views are, and hit that like and subscribe button. Until next time, keep being creepy.